stress.
Okay.
Surprise myself as well. Like one step at a time. And I'm waiting for it. Hello. Hello. Hi. Oh, women so far. Women are interested in power. That's what I like. Yeah, not all women, but majority.
Oh, there's two more men coming in.
Okay, good, good.
Hi.
That's good. How's it going? Good, yeah.
We are live streaming right now, just so everyone knows. I hope it's working by what you say.
Oh, the balance is changing. See what you share is actually working.
How are you? Good.
I think strategy-wise, I hear
Next week we have our first of potentially 4 kind of in-person meetings of our strategy team.
Cool.
So
yeah.
I'll know better, next week about it this time or soon thereafter. How far the divergences are amongst various folks in that group, or if we are miraculously, of a single mind and can just kind of plow ahead. I suspect it will be the former. So, no, but it's good. It's a good moment to be kind of taking a step back and thinking about what we've learned and where we want to go. About halfway through the process, I'll probably want to crawl under a rock somewhere.
My computer is being very slow. I just want to make sure this is actually working.
But fortunately, this summer, I think we'll have kind of a big push for the next 6 weeks, and then there'll be kind of a bit of a natural lull.
I know.
As people drift in and out of holidays and being in the office over the summer.
Is there any?
And then again,
I'm just gonna look up YouTube on my phone. Or could I look it up?
November, we'll probably have another kind of big push.
Okay.
So there will be a bit of a natural
Please.
slightly more humane than just kind of a fake clock of 6 months in which we're just
Do you by now do anything else but sort of like strategy and strategy drafting? I mean, just really, I'm thinking of the TAP, I guess now. And
yeah. I mean, it's kind of that intersection of what kinds of ideas and lessons are we learning, and how would we actually do things differently in order to reflect that learning. So.
Yay.
By the way,
Okay.
you met with Elsa. So this is Brandon, this is Elsa.
Hi.
Elsa has worked with us in the past for numerous years, actually, but has joined Global Integrity as staff last year. So she's now heading the Africa Integrity Indicators project.
Good luck.
And Brandon is sort of like, I mean, he's worked with TAI prior. I think prior to that you did your PhD.
PhD, USAID, TAI, and now IDP, so that's my life story.
Yeah.
In acronyms. Acronyms.
Like they're in acronyms.
That's so good.
I think it's the acronyms is the life of all people working in development. It just should change. I used to work at the World Bank, and I remember and before that I was Freedom House, and it was different acronyms. So it's learning the world of acronyms takes you forever.
You have to force the old ones out of your head to make space for the
Okay, so yeah, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today for this discussion about NGOs and power. My name is Neda, and I'm the manager here at the Opengov Hub. I always like to ask, is this anyone's first time coming to the Opengov Hub? Good, welcome. Very happy to have you here. So just a quick background is that the Opengov Hub was established in late 2012, and it was set up as the first co-working community to focus on open government issues. We've always defined open government as having these three pillars: transparency, accountability, and civic participation. And so we have both this physical shared space and a community of organizations who are helping promote open government reforms all around the world. Right now we have 40 member organizations and about 200 people. Fortunately, we're not all in this room at this time. But thank you for joining us. We have some members in the room. And basically the hub exists both to help these organizations and open government advocates just get their work done by sharing resources like meeting space and workspace, but also really to create a collaborative community, which actually helps organizations have greater impact by learning from each other and working together in a variety of ways. And we've always hosted a huge variety of regular events, usually about once a week at least, in order to help create this collaborative community. So we're really, really pleased to have our two guests with us today, who I'll just briefly introduce before handing it over. So our main speaker today is Ana Babovic, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is the founder of Serbia on the Move. Ana began her career working in the government as an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister in Serbia. And later founded Serbia on the Move, which is a nonprofit which has engaged thousands of citizens in a variety of campaigns and initiatives, which we're excited to hear more about today. And she's also a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government and has a Master's of Public Administration, where she did a lot of work as well with Professor Marshall Gans on community organizing and public narrative. And our moderator today is Shaska Bayerly, who is an anti-corruption expert, has authored a few books on curtailing corruption and also freedom from corruption, and she's currently a fellow at the U.S. Institute for Peace. So typically with our 1 hour today, we tend to do the first half of the discussion more for the presenter and then open it up to conversation, but I'll leave it to Shaska to kind of guide our discussion today. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Neda. Thank you, Opengov Hub. And thanks to all of you for coming today, especially because it's so beautiful outside and it's very tempting just to be outdoors after all the rain and cold weather we've been having. I will just mention that at USIP, I will just make one tiny plug about what I'm doing because I would like to reach out to people as broadly as possible, informally and systematically, but in my fellowship, I'm going to be developing a handbook for external actors about how to engage with grassroots initiatives, social movements, campaigns, NGOs that are engaged actively in empowering and mobilizing citizens. So I will be reaching out to people and really welcoming input at different stages of this project because I really see this as a collaborative project that is going to be based on the input and feedback that I get from people, both external actors and people on the ground. So that's enough about the project. But this is a great room, actually, and I'm really excited. I mean, I think we both are very excited because this can be truly more of an informal discussion rather than something very formal. So what we decided, Ana and I, would be to basically focus a little bit on the bullet points in the invitation that you received, but then use that as the launching pad to have a broader discussion about these issues of NGOs and power and framing nonviolent action and how this is relevant to what people are doing in the open government, transparency, and accountability space. So without further ado, I'm just going to start. So I'm not interviewing you. It's not BBC or Davos.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
But I mean,
why don't we just start off with this first bullet point, which is why do INGOs, International Non-Government Organizations, for those of us who are watching, because everybody here will know what that means, and CSOs, civil society organizations, need to think about power?
Good one. First of all, thank you, for hosting us here and for opening this room for discussion about power, which we so often just skip and don't want to talk about. And thank you, Shasta, for your idea to organize. Can we just see who is in the room in terms of like how many people who are here in the Opengov Hub NGOs? Good. Okay, so majority. And people who are outside of the. Can you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from? Like, just to be a word.
I'm John Ruthroff. I work for Interaction Online, so 190 U.S. NGOs on the Church of International Peace.
I'm Marian Carringer, and I'm with the Coalition for Integrity, which is formerly Transparency International USA.
Darren Kashab, working at the World Bank on social development.
Awesome. Thanks.
Brendan Halloran in the Strategy and Learning team at the International Budget Partnership.
Awesome.
Jonathan Bucks, Accountability Research Center at American University. And Marcio, I work for the Brazilian government and I'm currently a research fellow here at the EU.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Ahmed Hafez, Egyptian activist and co-founder of Sheikh Income, a non-governmental organization also observing the elections in Egypt.
Giselle McCall, president of Bigger Impact and International Strategic Communication Consultancy.
Hi, I'm Mihai. I work with Joseph Hopkins University.
Awesome.
And I'm Megan Quirkley. I'm a law fellow at Public International Law.
Good. Thank you so much. It's first it looked to me the majority of people here are from the organizations here, and then we see majority is actually from the outside. Sorry that I didn't want to hijack. Just
No, that's great. I was just waiting for somebody to come in. She was looking like she didn't know she should come in.
Good. So just to go back to your question, and I would really like to keep this part short and then to invite you to discuss together this topic. It's very important. For me, the question of why do we need to look into power or to understand power before we start doing anything is maybe based on the definition of power, how I see it, which is like ability. I mean, that's something that Dr. King said, and it's ability to achieve purpose. And for the work that we did and that I'm trying to do is that is usually change. So in order to have ability to make change, you need to have power. And then the question is that usually from the NGO perspective or social movement perspective, or like you're trying to challenge the status quo, and you're trying to solve some injustices, right? And when you want to do that, in order to achieve that purpose or that change, you need to get power. I mean, simply like that. So in that sense, I think you need to understand who has an interest on keeping the status quo, who has an interest on making change, who are your collaborators, who are people who you need to address in order to get that piece of power that can make the change possible. Very simple, and we can discuss this further, but that's, I think, the idea. If you are trying to achieve change without really looking into who is going to oppose that or who can support that, then we can't really talk much about change, right? You need to understand where the power for that lies.
Which sort, I mean, is the segue to then the whole discussion about citizens and why in your experience and in your work, both first in the government and then in civil society, why are citizens critical sources of power? And what does this mean for INGOs and CSOs?
Yeah, so for me, the understanding that citizens are actually where the power comes from is, I mean, it first started from my experience in the government, because we were mainly approached by NGOs who were representing citizens, but really never had citizens behind them. There was like a large gap between who they represent. And in that sense, you were sitting in the government, they would ask us for meetings, you would meet people, but then you realize that it's always the ask for cooperation or something without really basing it on like what citizens on the ground. So when I started NGO, when I co-founded with other people, our idea was to try to address that gap that was between civil society and citizens, so that we don't represent them, but really to engage them. And that's actually how we started. We started implementing different projects. But what was happening is actually that at the moment, at the beginning, when you address local authorities or national authorities to make some of the changes that you're proposing, some of the policies that you're proposing, they don't respond. And one of the examples that we have there at the beginning, we did the campaign. It was part of our fight against corruption in healthcare. So our first intention was to try to get citizens charter in all healthcare facilities in Belgrade. So we sent a request for the meeting. We called several times. It was a citizen period, and it never has ever responded to us. So the first thing that we did, and that was just at the beginning of Serbian now, what we did is we started organizing people, we started organizing citizens. Then the first thing that we did is collecting 10,000 signatures, and then we didn't really call anymore. We just handed those 10,000 signatures with nothing there. I mean, just explanation of what we are doing. And tomorrow they gave us a call and asked for me. So it's like before that, it was just like an NGO which they didn't hear of before. So it's like not important, right? But then when we started getting people, I can't say behind us because people are always in front of us. But it's like when we started getting people on the board, that's what gave us power to communicate with others. And that's obviously how they understand how important you are. Actually, how much of a resource you have depends on how many people people have.
Thank you. And this is a segue, but I remember you had said that when you were on the government side, for example, there were so many requests coming in from NGOs and groups, and it was almost impossible for you to react, to meet with everyone. And so, and you couldn't really tell which ones were like actually out there, actually doing things, and which ones were more like in an office and, doing things. And so how does that bridge with the fact that when you had the citizens, that shifted the view of those within the government about who you are and where you get your legitimacy?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, no, I completely agree with that. It's exactly that. You're receiving different kinds of policy proposals and requests for meetings, stuff like that. But those, in the majority of cases, those were like small NGOs, just few people, without really working with people on the ground. So it's like implementing lists of measures that they believe are needed, but then citizens on the ground are not connected with that somehow. And in that sense, I mean, we were talking with some of those who had bigger memberships, who had like bigger impact maybe on the people on the ground, but then with the rest, not that much. And then I'm always joking how they send a proposal for the policy, and that proposal goes from the table, then to the first jar, then the second jar, then the third jar, and then you never really read it. When you start reading it, it's like when that request that you're making is like really concrete, and there is people behind that to support that, right? And I think that was the whole mission of Serbia from the very beginning. It's like not us representing anyone, but actually enabling people to represent themselves in a way. And that's how that grew and like power was built. If that's answering your question.
Why don't we? Do you want to go on to our next point here, which is which was an interesting thing? Because what do you see? This was a very interesting observation that Anna had made actually in a conversation that we had about the difference between sustainability and impact for CSOs or NGOs. And so maybe you can just like share, some thoughts about that, and how that again also relates to power and impact.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I mean, for me, and maybe you can see that or not, like when we started Serbian Move, it was trying to do something that is really good on the ground. It wasn't like that we started NGO. We started recognizing that people on the ground are having completely different perspectives on what's happening, how the change could happen, and all this stuff. So we started really working with in consultation with everyone else. And then in terms, I remember of course we needed funding, right? So like the first project proposal that we wrote, it's always at the end like how you plan to make this sustainable. And one thing that I started thinking about that before is like whether the question is how you make yourself sustainable or the question is how you make an impact. Because if this is not good, if it is not making an impact, why it is important to be sustainable? Right? And like making it sustainable just for the sake of it, in my opinion, is not worth it. On the other hand, if it is making impact, and especially if it is making impact on people's lives, in whatever segment that, I mean, sometimes it's like changing people and people having transformation, so that's how it makes change in their lives, and sometimes because it's fixing something that is important for them, right? But then if there is an impact on people's lives, then people want to keep it. And with Serbia on the Move, we had a lot of challenges when we actually ran out of funds, and we can't keep it sustainable in a way. Like everything that we need is like an office and like how a place where people can gather and plan and do other stuff. But at some point we would run out of funds and we wouldn't have it. But then organization would survive. In that situation now, again. But the thing is like that there is so many people who are impacted with it and who want to invest their time and resources that they want to keep it sustainable, and they do it with different ways.
Well, you had said that that in fact you have very few paid employees, which was interesting, and that basically the whole organization, for the most part, is run by volunteers, not only in Belgrade but all over the country.
Exactly. At the time when I left Serbia, I never left. Never. But when I moved and like left the position of the executive director, at that time we had 150 people in different teams running the organization really that were volunteers. So they had responsibilities. For example, we had a call center for supporting the people who are reporting corruption, supporting them like in leading them through the process and how they can report it and all stuff. And those were like it started with 5 people, and then those people educated new teams and like got them in. So many people changed there, but at least I think 15 or 20 people over a year was in that center, like supporting citizens every day. And that's all volunteer, or journalists or different teams on like events, PR team, like our PR communications are completely volunteer. And it was really interesting because at some point I was talking with one of the donors and they were like, well, this is a small grant, and at the time we were like broke. And this is like a small grant, and with your budgets, like it's not for you. And I'm like, you say again? She was like, like you have like budgets of millions of dollars. And I was like, are you kidding me? And that time, like our budget was $40,000 that year, $40,000. And I was like, can you please tell me like where does that information come from? She's like, well, you're all over. Wherever you go, like you see Serbia on the Move. And I was like, well, yeah, because we have 10 people on the PR team. 10 people who are working, and like those are volunteers. So, they were producing much more than you can produce with one employee. And unfortunately, that's what happened. We of course, the way how we think about resources and generating them is you start doing things, you start involving people, and you're building power with that, but you're also building resources with that. And then human resources are actually growing when you're deploying them. And that's different from financial resources that you're actually losing when you are deploying them, right? Like the more you spend, the less you have. As simple as that. With human resources, it's the opposite. The more you spend, they bring more people and more energy, right? So for us, that's also the way how sustainability is built. It's like bringing in young people who are and doing cool stuff that people want to engage with. So that would be maybe the answer for that. But now, for example, with clubs, I mean, Serbian the Move is trying to be Serbian Move, not Belgrade Move. And we are doing that by establishing chapters of Serbian Move. Chapters, we call them clubs, because everyone wants to be part of some club, right? Or we hope so. And the thing is that it's not a chapter because chapters are usually well structured, less autonomous, and like we are usually like this. The central office is like giving instructions to the rest how to deal with things. Clubs of Serbia on the Move are established from the local leadership, so we identify the leadership, enable them, train them, and then they are working on the local stuff in their community. They're organizing small communities, so it's pretty. I mean, it's fairly autonomous. And now we have about 20 clubs around the country, so it's growing.
Which I mean, that's actually an interesting issue. Some people may want to talk to you about that later, about this experience of how to balance centralization of an organization and at the same time encourage autonomy of actors in other parts of whatever, the country, the region, the community. So we're looking at the time because we want to keep going and like have a good discussion. So I'm going to just ask you about the next bullet that was on our invitation, which is this this whole discussion that's starting to emerge in the transparency and accountability and participation field, which is this notion of there being a dichotomy between confrontation and collaboration for citizen-state engagement. And it could actually be not just citizen-state engagement, but citizen engagement with other vested types of authority structures. It could be a corporation, for that matter, or you know, even an external government, for that matter. And so in our bullet said, like, is this dichotomy misguided? And you know, what are alternative ways to think about the broad range of activities that citizens can engage in, and I'm talking specifically about nonviolent activities, but the broad range of activities that citizens can and do engage in on the ground in an organized fashion, whether it's with an NGO or perhaps in a less structured type of entity like a social movement or a campaign. And I just also add that others have started writing about it, and so I have here, for anybody who hasn't seen this yet, almost hot off the presses, a new report from Jonathan Fox, and he is also starting to discuss this. I mean, I have to admit that I've also been writing about this too, so we are very interested in stimulating a discussion about this whole topic.
What's the name of Jonathan's report?
That's right. It's online. Did you want to say something about it, Jonathan?
No.
Scaling accountability through vertically integrated civil society policy monitoring and advocacy.
It's less nerdy than it sounds.
But if you just put scaling accountability and Jonathan Fox, I think it'll come up. It just came out in December. And you can see I've really earmarked it and done all, because it's been really useful and very helpful in thinking about a lot of issues.
Highlighted, circled several times, underlined. No, but it's really good. And thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to having discussions with you. I don't know. For me, that whole thing about collaboration and confrontation is, in its basis, unnecessary. And one thing, I mean, just to begin with that, if you have that dichotomy, that actually means that we are looking at society as there is a civil society and an armed society. Like, it can't be together. And one of the biggest problem for me was, and that, I mean, when I was in the government, I was like NGO in the government. not like the one who was always asking like, okay, how are we cooperating with civil society? How are we cooperating with citizens? How are we making sure that what we are doing is widespread? And on the other hand, citizens are taking responsibility because that's what I learned in the government. If you're in the government but you don't have citizens who are taking responsibility, you're powerless because you cannot implement the best possible legislation on anti-corruption if people don't understand that they need to stop being corrupt. So you need to engage them, and I think that those two need to go together, right? But then the question is, what is the position that you are starting from? And one of the biggest issues that I had was when I moved from the government to the NGO world. People think that you are necessarily against the government, which is that dichotomy, like civil society and non-society. Like, it's not true. We are not here to oppose. We are here to change. And if you oppose, then we are getting into the confrontation mode. And if you agree and want to work with us on this, good, then we are cooperating. So I think that having that dichotomy up front, like, oh, you're always confronting, it's simply not true. On the other hand, how we understand both cooperation and confrontation depends a lot on the context. So in that sense, like, for me, if we are looking into collaboration, it again depends on like what is the power dynamic that we have in that relationship, right? So in majority of cases, when I was in the government, is like when as an NGO you're asking the government or whatever official authority for a meeting, then asking them for a cooperation, and they are the one who are almost like doing it as a favor to you. That's for me not a good relationship because the power dynamic is really bad. So they can ditch you whenever they don't want to talk with you anymore. And that for me is not good. When you are entering the collaboration in which both of you have power, you because you're basing it on citizens, and for me that's always power coming from people, and then on the other hand, them understanding that it's good for them to cooperate and that we can do something better together, that's the relationship that I really appreciate. And we can talk about some examples how we did it in Serbia. On the other hand, when we are talking about confrontation, there are moments, and that's unfortunately happening now in Serbia, where wherever you say, you voice your opinion, you're confronting, which is not true. I mean, voicing the opinion, saying that something is not right, asking how we can fix it, is for me not confrontation, is simply, I mean, exercise of your human right? So in that sense, I think it's very important to understand that. And then, of course, there is another way of confrontation that we can sometimes see in like mass protests on the street and like different, collective actions that are not strategically well thought through. And then sometimes it seems like just protests for the sake of protest, confrontation just for the sake of confrontation, which in my opinion, again, is not a good thing. So I would say that both of the things, both confrontation and collaboration, make sense. And the question is, do we need to have that dichotomy? Or we can say, okay, at least in Serbia on the Move, what you do is like, you start building people, power from people, and enabling people to do something, to make change. And then the way how are you going to engage about making change depends on like you're voicing your concern, you're voicing the problem that we need to fix. And then after that, you're figuring out your strategy and how you can make that change happen, whether it working with other guys or with challenging that power dynamic so that you can make change.
And you had said too, I mean, it's about, challenging the status quo. I mean, because, sometimes you have no choice but to challenge the status quo. And you had mentioned something, maybe others will want to talk about this in the discussion, but you talked about, and those who have studied Marshall Gaunt's or some other parts of strategic nonviolent action will know this, that it depends on your strategy. And it's not like choosing one or the other, but it depends on where you are, what are your objectives, what are your demands, and how this all fits into your overall strategy.
Exactly, and I think that the overall strategy again depends on. I mean, it's connected. You know, you can't kind of develop a strategy without thinking about circumstances, and if you don't adapt your strategy when circumstances change, then you're not a good strategizer, right? But one thing that happened to us several times is like we fight against corruption in healthcare. The way we started building power first with citizens and with doctors, like really trying to enable doctors to step up and to say, I'm not corrupted, I'm looking for salary, right? And like to open that conversation about a topic that at that time was completely. And then over time, we had that moment in like asking for a meeting, not getting the meeting at all, then submitting those 10,000 signatures, which was actually talking about 10,000 signatures in case of Serbia on the move is like 10,000 one-on-ones with people. It's not like come and give me your signature. It's like, why are we doing it? What do you think about it? Do you want to engage? And like we engaged a lot of people to that. Getting that meeting, nothing happened. We continue building power. We continue, like working with citizens. Then we create that website. What's the doctor like? Which aim was to evaluate doctors by patients, not their expertise, but like that patient-doctor relationship. And the government banned our website.
Even though they gave you permission at first.
Even though they gave us permission, they said it's completely legal and in line with law. Then when we published it. They say it's not legal, you can't do this, so you need to shut it down. And we, of course, start making noise, right? I mean, the thing was that when we published the website, our goal was to have 30,000 visits in 6 months. We had 30,000 visits in 10 days. It exploded. It was really crazy. And at the moment when they banned the website, I mean, they didn't ban it. They just told us like, oh, you are like doing it illegally now, so like you can remove the website, or you're going to go to judicial proceedings with us. And in Serbia we say the judge is suing, the judge is making decisions. So like there is no logic that you get into that fight, right? But what happened is that like the people who use the websites just like started fighting for it, on Facebook, on Twitter, everywhere else. People were questioning like what's going on in life. We put the picture of the man with his mouth taped, like they just didn't allow us to speak about this, and we put it on the website, and it's just exploded. Anyways, we needed to close the website, that part of the website. But what we did, we continued to build power, obviously, and to get new people, because that moment of confrontation, unfortunately, actually gave us a lot of support from citizens, because people were like, okay, what's going on here? You now need to get more of us on the board. And then the third thing that we did, we said, okay, you don't allow us to have a website, no problem, we are going to close that part. We introduced the text message service of reporting corruption, whom no one could ban, right? And like a lot of people started, on one hand, reporting corruption, on the other hand, joining us in like supporting all those claims and processing and all that stuff. But what happened then is that government actually called this time, and they were like, we just announced as usual, what are we going to do? The same as for our website. And then they realized that it's better to cooperate than to be against us. So they offered cooperation, Ministry of Health. And we said, okay, if you insist, we can cooperate, and that's fine, as long as this cooperation can go, not you go with us, take a picture with us, say, Serbia on the move is doing cool stuff, and we are cool too. No. The only way how we can cooperate is that you really follow up on what we're asking for, which means that we are receiving from citizens what are the problems on the ground. We have a scanner of the healthcare system, but that means that we are going to analyze what's happening and to provide recommendations how to change policies. And as long as you are changing policies on the basis of recommendations, not of Serbia on the move or Ana Babovic or whoever else, but people who are reporting it, we can cooperate. And for me, that was that power shift that like, as Mahatma Gandhi says, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And that's actually exactly what happened with us. First, they didn't want to, they didn't know who we are. Then they were like, yeah, you're looking for organized citizens. Then we had those fights with like banning the websites and stuff. And then we came to the position of, okay, let's cooperate and do something. And then finally, I think that, and I'm going to close here, what I think is crucially important is when you are working with citizens, then cooperation with the government could be challenging. Because they can say, oh, now you're cooperating with them, and yesterday they closed your website. So for us, it was super important, which meant that when the government is acting on our policy proposals, we are saying that out loud. Like, they are doing a good job, they are changing what citizens felt is necessary to change. But when they didn't change anything, we were going out saying that they didn't change anything. So it's like not cooperation again for the sake of cooperation, but cooperation for the sake of change, and whenever it happens.
Wow, thanks for sharing all these rich experiences. Anna didn't get to tell you what the 3 questions were that the 30,000 citizens rated their doctors on, and actually they were extremely benign, which was very clever and strategic. But you may want to ask her about that. But looking at the clock, which is in a great position, I'm thinking that maybe we should just stop with like formal presentation and just like start having an exchange with comments, ideas, questions, whatever. So please just identify who you are, and and then let's just like have like our roundtable discussion.
Hi, I'm Elsa Feraldi. I work at Global Integrity. And my first question is, you had a profile for your volunteers. Was mostly students, young? Like, who were your volunteers?
That's a good question. In organizing, we always start. First question is for your people, not what is your problem. So in that sense, we always first identify who are the people that we want to work with, and then we ask like, what is the problem, right? So in Serbia, it depends from campaign to campaign. In general, our people are young people and women. That's our constituency. But then for each time we are focusing it and narrowing it down to something. I would say in our campaigns in the field of fight against corruption, it's mainly again young people, but also doctors and medical students. Yeah.
But you had mentioned something really interesting to me too, that among the young people that have been involved in Serbia on the move, you did not just, for example, involve university students, or you in fact actually have a lot of unemployed youth participating, and unemployment among youth is a very big problem in Serbia.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I wouldn't say we ever targeted unemployed people. Of course, they have a lot more time and they want to do something that is good. One thing that we did with intentionally is that, for example, in Serbia, it's really difficult to get the first job because everyone is asking you to have working experience, and like it's a vicious circle. Like I can't have working experience because no one wants to give me a first job, so it's like difficult. So what we did with Serbia on the Move, we had that practice of like coming in, getting experience, and like getting kind of a certificate that you or a recommendation letter or something for this job. But that's more of a transaction, I would say. What is happening is that people who are young, they need to get that experience. They come for experience, but then they have transformation because we are thinking about how we can grow them and how we can build them and grow their leadership skills as well. So that's why they are staying and bringing in new people who are then university students, older guys. I mean, we had a lot of people at the local level who are not students at all, who are like women or like local people's person in a way. It's like people who are having good community relationships in their communities and want to do something.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that question? Just that, can you talk more about the difference between having a transactional relationship with your people, your base, your volunteers, versus like getting to that transformational stage? And earlier you mentioned how 10,000 signatures for you guys didn't mean 10,000 signatures, it meant 10,000 one-to-ones, and like the human resources needed to go behind that. So like, what do you think are some of the key elements to actually mobilize your volunteers or your members to the point that they're kind of lifelong committed in this journey?
I don't know if this is lifelong or whatever. A little bit too ambitious. No, I think that's something that I started to understand later on. And I had unfortunately a lot of experience in that transactional relationships in which like, what is the skills that you have? What are the resources that you have? Good, I need it. So can you come here, give me what you have, and I'm gonna satisfy some of your interests and some of your needs. And in that situation, we have like bad teams that are only thinking like, I'm here for. I work in this office because I'm like getting money for it, but it's, or you know, like it's just transaction. What I give, what I get. And in majority of NGOs, that's like, oh, you come to the collective action, like street action, whatever. You do what you're supposed to do, and then you go. And we had like 100 volunteers in that street action, so everyone is good. And in that case, I mean, no one is growing anywhere, and we are not creating that synergy effect. So the idea is, of course, you have some interest when you are coming to the organization or where you want to do anything. But the question is how we can combine our resources together so that we achieve more than just, you know, like working together. It's like synergy effect there. But there is also that we are thinking about how each of us can grow in terms of learning, and how each of us can, I mean, Shaska and I are exchanging our views, and each of us are growing in terms of our learning about social movements and like trying to improve one another, like working on our growth edges. And when that is happening on a larger scale, that has much bigger effect. That also comes to the question of like one-on-ones and signatures, because if you are recruiting volunteers to go out on the street and collect signatures, it's just a task. So they sit and it's super boring. No one likes to do it. I mean, of course. But then what we are doing is like we are trying to create all these events. First, Marshall calls that motivational task design. So that you first need to understand what is the impact that piece of work is having for the overall picture. So that's always a story like you're seeing a guy who is carrying bricks, and you're asking him what he's doing, and he's like, I'm carrying all these bricks, you know, like super bored, super dissatisfied. And there is another guy, and you're asking him, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm building cathedral. So it's a big difference whether you're building cathedral or you're carrying bricks, whether you're, you know, collecting signatures on street and bugging people who are passing by, or you're like fighting against corruption in healthcare in your country, you know, like, or making 10,000 doctors being visible because they're doing a good job. You know, it's like the way how you frame it. And I think that it's important for us whenever we are inviting volunteers to come, we are really inviting them for that bigger change that is happening, not for something really basic and concrete. The last thing, and I'm gonna close here, is that people who are coming in the organization, we are not giving tasks ever. We are always engaging them in the creation of our strategy, tactics, and everything. So they are taking responsibility, and they are also in charge of getting more people on the board. So, for example, in order to be a team leader, you can be a team leader. We are going to train, we are going to coach you, we are going to provide you with the whole support. You are going to be part of like thinking about strategy, tactics, and everything. But you are also going to have your team, so that like leadership that we are exercising, everyone in the organization is exercising their leadership as well, and like practicing it and getting more people on the board. And that's, I think, again, really important part for that transformation, because they don't come to give something to us, they come to do something for themselves, if that makes sense.
You were pointing out the importance of the notion of, not the notion of, but the reality of building a sense of collective responsibility and collective ownership. Exactly. And if I could just give a shout out about how Anna and I know each other, maybe I will just turn to Berenika for a minute to give you to tell you about a new report that's coming out next month that will be available through the World Bank. Do you want to just like tell everyone what the report is on?
Briefly, we've been looking at 3 cases of citizen engagement related to improving education and health outcomes through
grassroots-led citizen action and how they interact with the state. And it's linked to the well-developed report on governance and the law that just came out in January that looks at the notion of power and how power asymmetries are affecting governance and overall development. And there's a chapter on citizens as agents of change. And so we're trying to use that framework and then look at specific cases and see how through that lens we can understand why certain groups were successful and in which ways, and then combined with looking at collective action, a sense of identity and ownership that these groups have.
And so it'll be available next month. You'll be able to download it, and we'll be broadcasting it as soon as it comes out. Okay. You had your hand up, and then afterwards you, and then I will turn to Ahmed, who is himself an activist, as you said, from Egypt, and Shafin Kom has been one of the most innovative, you could say similar to Serbia on the Move, NGO, social movement, hybrid, mobilizing citizens in Egypt to impact corruption and gain accountability. So I'll turn to you after these are the two participants. Yes.
I'm John Ruthrock again. It's very exciting to hear about Serbia on the Move. And Marshall Gans is clearly one of the leaders in the community organizing area. Jonathan's a major thinker in it, as well as John Gavent and some other folks. The one thing, I work with the Industrial Areas Foundation, IAF, which I'm sure Marshall Gans members you may have heard of it. There's an alliance of about 60 U.S. projects doing organizing. The one thing that you didn't mention is the risk factor. In some countries, mobilizing citizens can be very dangerous. It's good that in Serbia you've got some contacts. I mean, it's not they're not going to kill you for it. If you do it in other countries, depending on how authoritarian and how repressive they are, so that and the description you have, which we call power analysis, is very important. Not only to learn to figure out what power you have over whoever you're trying to influence and what power they have over you, but also look at the risk politically, organizationally, and personally that people have if taking on different things. And that's just an element that in many countries you have to look at. Here, it's relatively safe. I mean, the United States is much all over the place.
No, I completely agree. I mean, and that's why whenever we think about this kinds of stuff, it's not from a lake. You have to put it in context and understand what's happening. I just think that repressive regimes, I mean, for example, in Serbia back in time, you could be killed for being organized. I mean, for getting organized. And we remember that time, unfortunately, with Milosevic and stuff. And then in the midst of that, we had Otpor, organizing a lot of people. But then the question is, how many of those who are ready to step up and do something you have, how are you going to enable people to step up and say, you know, like, it's dangerous, but I need to do something about it? Because otherwise, I mean, that's the question of, again, Gandhi and all non-violence things. Is like, are things going to get better if you do nothing? They are not. So the question is how you actually awake agency in people and how you actually get them to do something about, you know, like fighting super anti-democratic regimes or authoritarian regimes. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that each kind of change, especially in those kind of countries, requires sacrifice, and we need to deal with it.
And I think of it too that that you are always very open with people about what they're doing, and there's also this strategic assessment that people do in many different contexts about what is risky in my context. So collecting signatures may not be risky in your context. It could be very risky in another context, but then there are so many different types of actions that citizens can take that depending on the context, it's literally, I mean, people always seem to find a way to make their voice, to harness and broadcast their voices in a powerful way, somehow in a way that may not be so risky in their context. And I will just give an example, and Ahmed will be able to talk about Egypt, for example. Under the Mubarak regime, Shafin Com gave out tea glasses and shopping bags that had their logo on it, which means in Arabic, we're watching you. So maybe they couldn't go out and get the 10,000 signatures, but when they gave out 10,000, I don't know how many, was it 100,000 tea glasses all over the country, and people in all the little tea shops were drinking them, that was actually an interesting low-risk action that they took to sort of to sensitize the public, get them to know who they were. Then they launched something that has now in other countries become integrity idol. They launched that under the Mubarak regime, literally having citizens vote for a civil servant who is serving with honesty and integrity through a satellite television station. So, I mean, it was just fascinating. There's so many, I think in that respect, that's a really rich conversation, and maybe, something that could be explored in depth even in another session here about how citizens do that. In Uganda, and this was actually a Partnership for Transparency Fund project, but citizens were calling in to a radio station in which a police officer was there to listen or respond to their comments. And so they may not have the courage, or it might be too dangerous for them to confront a police officer and say, why did you ask me for a bribe or take me off to jail when I hadn't committed a crime? But through the radio program, people were able to do that in a very low risk way. But I don't want to, our time is, so it's a really interesting, very rich area for discussion. And I think there can be a lot of exchange and learning from, the experiences around the world. Turning to
Giselle.
Yes.
I just wondered, going back to your recruitment, discussion of recruiting and attracting volunteers and supporters, do you ever look at members of government, including individuals who may want to remain publicly invisible to their support, but are willing to provide intelligence and other help, assistance with strategy, etc.? Do you ever focus on potential government members of any sort?
So let me try to address this. In general, with Serbia on the Move, whoever is smart and can contribute is welcome. And I don't look at that as whether that someone is part of the government or not, right? There are a lot of resources in the society, right? Sometimes those members are not. Sometimes the members are in other NGOs or international organizations. So it doesn't have to be necessarily the government. We never really approach the government asking for that kind of thing, but there are people who are smart and with who you can think about strategy and what is the change that is needed. And I think that those agents of change in the institutions are super important, because if you don't give them voice, then they feel powerless as well. So in that sense, I think it's important that you can identify all the actors and that you can cooperate with those who want to participate. That's it.
Well, I don't know if you're exactly answering it. I mean, of course, you're open to everybody, and it could be change agents in the government. Do you strategically or actively seek out supporters of varying kinds in the government, or do you just simply you're passive? I mean, you have a very aggressive recruitment for volunteers, clearly, that are outside of government. Do you have any kind of recruitment program for people inside, and why not?
It's a really good question, really. I mean,
because governments, in the situation that you're in Serbia and others, it's my experience that they can have people that they are asking to volunteer with an organization like yours. Not necessarily to do anything nefarious, but certainly so that they're up to date on what your strategies are and what you're going to do next and when, and sort of what your thinking is and who you are and how you work and who the leaders are. And I work at, a high level with advocacy, sort of at a leadership. I work at a very strategic level. And so, not that the organizations I've served are ever looking to sort of become like a secret service, sort of let's add that to our operations and, and surreptitiously go around. But we certainly have a recruitment strategy that fits with the organization's ethics and its objectives, because there may be members of government in strategic positions to the policies and practices you're trying to change that can be very informative and helpful and give you tremendous insight on a strategy that could be more effective. And again, another way to look at it is this. So I've worked with organizations in Southeast Africa. They were seeking a policy change. A bunch of organizations have had sort of similar goals and were working on policy change. They all shared their intelligence with each other towards the policy change they were all seeking. And by doing that, they had intelligence on various policymakers and people in government. They were able to put together a strategy that was the fastest moving advocacy change strategy one of the fastest that I've documented. And it was very open and above board, but it was so strategic. It came from government sources, not so indirectly.
In what I'm hearing in that case, we had government and representatives of NGO. And did we have people engaged, like citizens?
Just basically, do you recruit?
What's government? No, I've heard the question, but I'm just asking about this. You're saying that's the fastest advocacy campaign that happened, with change. I mean, in addition to people from the government and people.
Oh, the NGO and the people. Oh, yeah. But it was the NGO people. We're talking, because it was a whole group of NGOs, we're talking to a variety of government officials that each of them had better access to than maybe the other. And they shared everything they knew from those folks. And the reason they had those folks was because they recruited those folks.
No, I hear what you're saying. We have never been intentional about recruiting government people to give us any kind of information. We are, of course, having relationships with people who are, among other stuff, working in the government. Not necessarily only in the government. There are so many think tanks and organizations and international organizations that are having expertise in this stuff as well. So in that sense, and I think that's one part of being the hybrid organization. It's like having all the access to all this information, which I agree completely are helping you strategize much better and identifying the theory of change that you want to use. So in that sense, I would say that we have a bit of it, but I wouldn't say that we are strategic in engaging them in the organization. So there are people, because for me it's like, whether you're in the government or not doesn't make much of a difference for me if you're engaged in the organization. Everyone is bringing different kind of resources. And your resources could be that you understand the area better, that you understand the policies better. And in our organization, there are many people who are like that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't differentiate you because you're a member of the government from someone else. It's like, at the moment when you are coming to Serbia and move, it's like, how are you contributing to the change that we are making? So I wouldn't say that we have. And another thing is also that we are not a classic advocacy organization. And that was like when we did the Rights for Moms campaign, it's not about me going to the parliament or people in the government and advocating for change of the law. I don't do that. I can do that. And we have those, again, relationships and connections or whatever. But what we do is like organizing people to do that claim. I mean, to have that request for themselves. So when we were changing, for example, law on maternity payments for moms, one of the ideas was, I mean, one of the ways is that you are doing advocacy, organizing 10 people and like speaking with members of the parliament. We actually organized 250 moms to speak one-on-one with 250 members of the parliament. And when they got majority, their ministers called us again and said, okay, we are going to change the law. Can you sit around the table and start working on changing the law with us? So I think this is a different approach simply because we are not doing advocacy. That's mainly, if we were doing advocacy, then I guess we would use that strategy, but that's simple enough.
But others, one could cite other examples where there were very close ties with people within the government for particular campaigns. So, for example, in Brazil, Ficha Limpa movement, they had very specific people. But that's different. I don't want to get off topic because we're focusing on NGOs and hybrid organizations. But in that case, there were very specific ties cultivated with supportive members within the Brazilian Congress to introduce and pass what's called a popular bill.
Just one thing, if I can build on that. In that sense, hybrid, I think, is what is important here because you're actually combining the resources of expertise. So, like, social movements usually have, like, the idea of what needs to be changed, and then they go out and request that, right? And, like, how is that change going to happen? No one knows it, right? Like, there is just a request. And then, on the other hand, you have policy expertise that can formulate something that is really concrete. So that, for example, if it is change of the law, here is the proposal. Or, and in that sense, like, being hybrid, I think, helps a lot because you have formulated requests and people's power to support it, and then when you merge it, you have pathway to action and pathway to change it is much shorter.
Yeah, it's interesting because my experience is that most, whatever you want to call them, advocacy groups in America are organized as hybrids. I mean, all of my clients, to your definition, all of my clients are hybrids. Interesting.
Can I just point out
I'm going to turn to Ahmed now.
I think it depends greatly from one system to another. Like it depends on how deep your government is and how authoritarian your government is and how relaxed your government is. Like we like Shayfinkum, it's an organization pretty identical to Serbia on the Move. We have basically a rule of no one affiliated with the government or political parties to be part of our organization. If they wish to do that, then they're gonna have like a smaller kind of a level of a membership. For several reasons, is because after the revolution there was a lot of backlash from the government on the civil society that mobilized the Arab Spring and all of that movement. And a lot of people were infiltrating organizations to ruin them deliberately, and a lot of organizations failed in the region because of that. So I mean, like I don't know what's like the story in southern west southeast.
It was southeast.
Yeah.
Southeastern. It was regional. Yeah.
But I mean, like in general, I think it's like it's an important part, but like it really depends on from one country and one system to another, and how strong the government is.
And I would say those are two different theories of change, which doesn't say this is right, this is wrong, and like you need to do it by building power from people, or you need to do it through advocacy. I'm not saying any of those. I think those are different, and when combined, I mean the result will definitely be better. That's in general.
So I had a question, and this is something we faced in Shayfinkum in Egypt, is that we had a huge, strong empowerment and buzz after the revolution, and we had around 20,000 members and volunteers with us. We were observing elections in all governorates, and we grew rapidly, and we were actually starting to observe, and we observed elections in Tunisia, and we were starting to observe political party elections and all of that. And then came 2013. That buzz kind of died. And a lot of those newly motivated volunteers that joined after the revolution kind of backed out or went in a coma or were just depressed and decided to leave the civil society and volunteerism as a whole. So my question is, how do you guys deal with sustaining your newly volunteers in Serbia on the Move?
Well, I think that one thing here, and I'm going to ask you a question, but it's one thing that we need to understand, I think, in working with social change is that it has the rhythm of campaign. And rhythm of campaign is different than rhythm of like cycle, right? It's like time is an arrow. And it's completely normal that when you're having the campaign that goes like you're trying to achieve something or when you're growing massively, there needs to be a moment, and now I have the drive to draw it. It's really difficult to explain it, but like the timeline of the campaign, and then it goes like this. So when you're working on like building your capacity, monitoring elections, at some point you reach the point in which you need to go down, and that's natural. Like people, how do you say that in English? I always forget it. But when women give birth, and then there is depression afterwards.
Postpartum depression.
That's exactly what is happening, and it's normal. But what you need to do is to give people break here, to make sure it doesn't dissolute and like disappear because you want to capture that energy. And what is needed that there is structure, and I'm not gonna teach anymore. Yeah, I guess time for me to go back. But like, it's normal that is happening. You need to understand that. You need to figure out the way. What is the structure that is going to hold these people, or at least majority of them? And then what we do in this phase is like we evaluate what we did, and we started planning next steps and building capacity. But if you don't understand that it's natural that it's going to happen, then you can't prepare for that. And then when you can't prepare for that, it just disappears. And then you sit there and you're like, okay, where to start again? Because you're starting from scratch. And it happened to us a lot of times. And for me, the reason why we started building those permanent teams was like, when your organization which is doing campaigns, then from one campaign to another, there is no one. And I was like, oh, like we finish the campaign was the doctor-like, and from the moment in which you had like 100 people or 200 people circulating through the office every day, you come to me sitting with my assistant, and I'm like, okay, it's boring. What's going on? And then we started thinking about making sustainability, but like having people engaged always. And then like that's one part of how you think about those like steps between campaigns and between weeks. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but like in our case, just like it went that way and then complete reverse.
It was a more dangerous situation.
It is a much more dangerous situation.
Right,
like the civil society is pretty,
major.
I would say, pretty dead, or like is in intensive care in Egypt.
Intensive care or dormant?
What's dormant?
Dormant sleeping, but will be reactivated.
I wish it is, but with this current regime, I don't think it's gonna be dormant for a
But
long
why
time.
do you think? I think it's very important to address that question, because the question is, if there is a fear, why do you think people stepped up at first? Because it's really easy for us to say, oh, people are scared because of the regime, and that's why we can't get them out of coma. The question is, what are the other resources and their hopes that you can tap into to make them awake? And what is the structure, what is the support that you're going to, what are the emotions that you're trying to trigger in those people in order to do something? Because if people are feeling fearful, which is normal, then if they are isolated, they're going to have even more fear. And then if you want to tackle that question of fear, how are you going to provide space in which they're going to be together so that they stop being that fearful? I mean, that's one of the ways how you reduce fear in people. Like, you're making sure that they're not isolated. They're part of some community that they can save.
I would argue it's not fear that really made the buzz go down. It's more of losing hope. People, like I would always say the Arab Spring has succeeded in one thing, which is kill fear. In my generation, at least, we are no longer scared of dictators. We know it could happen, but it's heavily backfired through being without hope. because we realized as a general, I'm talking here as the other people that dropped out of the activism movement. They realized that the regime and the system is deeper and smarter than what they will ever achieve. Especially in Egypt, because in Egypt, like, people see that the Muslim Brotherhood coming over and being removed in a year was a massive plan by the military that is extremely deep in the country since the 50s, before that probably since the pharaohs. And so I would say, like, what happened is it's not people are becoming scared again. People became hopeless. And that sense, it's very hard to empower someone who is hopeless, who has no, like, they are just.
So do you think there is a hope?
Oh yeah, of course.
Where is?
Not today, but.
No, but really, like, what do you think is, where is the hope?
Well, I mean, time is on our generation's side, because in Egypt it's a very generational thing. And which is very similar to America as well, like, or in England, like with the Brexit, the older generation voted for Brexit and the younger generation voted no. Same here, the people that voted for Trump were mostly of a older generation, so it's the same with us as well. So that's why I'm kind of like, I'm hopeless. I'm hopeful.
You know, I wondered, is it possible to provide to conduct some sort of survey of people that were involved and no longer are? I mean, that's something that I've had clients do. I mean, there's all sorts of groups that really specialize in conducting those kinds of surveys. So, because now you're working on assumptions, and they may be totally right, but tremendously useful to have a more nuanced understanding and perhaps learn that the assumptions may not be totally right and that there may be opportunities you're just, not aware of.
If I may just add one thing, is like, I think, listening is always important, and we are always trying to, but I wouldn't say that that's the case for you. If you engage so much people, I would say that you know what is driving them. One thing I think that is super dangerous, and that is related to millennials to some extent, is like, we want everything now. And like, if it doesn't work from first, like, it's hopeless. And I think that's very dangerous. And one of the things that we worked on with our people is like, the fact that you get engaged now and that we are part of one campaign and we don't succeed doesn't mean that it's impossible. It means that it needs more work. And I think it's relevant for all countries in the world. It's that question of freedom and like fighting for it always, and every generation needs to win it again. I mean, that's the part of the song, and I can call it. But the idea is no, not sing it, just tell it. But the idea is, it says freedom is freedom doesn't come as a bird on the wing, doesn't fall like a summer rain. Freedom is a hard-won thing. You have to work for it. You have to fight for it every day and night for it, and every generation again.
Civil rights song.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, the whole point, because if you organize, one thing is, I think, related to setting expectations. So like, when you're starting something that is as big, you need to, we say that, like, immunize people from fear, like telling them we might fail, we might not achieve what we want to achieve, but that means that we go down, reevaluate, and then start again. Because if you're thinking about civil rights movement in US, it started like 50 years ago, and it's still not done. It's like, we are moving. It's not gonna. One campaign is not going to bring freedom to Egypt or not to Serbia, but like every of these little peaks is one step closer. And I think that our role as leaders in that area is to know that, to communicate that with our people, and to make sure that one part will always drop out. That's normal, but like making sure that what is healthy and what has that drive for change stays there, and that we can use it for next week and next campaign, and that's until we finish it. And then, we finish our part, but then our kids continue with it.
Thank you for ending on this
hopeful note.
Very hopeful note. And that's why for me I'm always such an optimist because I have the privilege of getting to know and hanging around with extraordinary people, including Ahmed and Anna and others, and so I'm always optimistic about the capacity of people to do amazing things and to bring forth changes, even if they're incremental and step by step, but nevertheless they are happening. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and for staying later. And you can be in touch with us. We can give you our email addresses and things like that. I have cards. Anna has her. You can be in touch with her. So please, let's. If you want to be in touch, let's continue this discussion. And thank you again to Opengov Hub for this opportunity.